So, you want to be a real estate investor, but where do you start? How do you know what information and sources to trust? That's where I come in. I'm Jonny Cattani, and this is the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. Hey guys, real quick, before we start, go to investwithcattani.com and download my free ebook, Is Commercial Real Estate Recession Proof? Now to today's show. What's up, guys, and welcome to the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Jonny Cattani, and I'm joined today by Joe Cornwell. He was a full-time police officer from 2012 to 2021. He retired last year to pursue investing in businesses full-time. He began real estate investing after selling a live-in flip in 2015. He became a licensed real estate agent in Ohio in 2016 and started a construction company in 2017. He bought a few rental properties each year and has now around 50 units, ranging from 2 to 8 properties and storage garages. Mainly does full rehab BRRRR deals on the investing side. He also works with many investor clients to buy and sell real estate. He does full service residential renovations for investors and typical retail clients. He has a full 6 employees and 1 assistant. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Kind of butchered that there, but you know what? That's what happens when you do live introductions. So April, we're going to keep that one in. April's my producer, by the way.
There's a lot in there. So it's all good.
I love it. That's a great resume. We were kind of talking offline, you like the smaller property sizes, which, isn't as sexy as the 200 units, as I like to put it, but still great returns. But kind of before we get all to that stuff, we talked about it there. You were a full-time police officer. You got your first taste with your first flip, but what introduced you to that? How did you kind of discover that? And what brought you here?
Yeah. So I was a police officer. I went through the academy in 2011. And I had no idea at that point I wanted to invest in real estate. I didn't really know anything about real estate. I bought my first primary house in 2011. And obviously at that time, the market was really cheap compared to where we are today. I didn't really know it at the time, but I got a really good deal on a house. And I started just kind of doing some DIY renovations to the house. I had a stepdad who had some flipped some houses, 20, 30 years prior to that. And he kind of overseen what I was doing and kind of walked me through things I didn't know how to do. But that was my first hands-on experience in construction. And, things I didn't know how to do, I YouTubed and learned and kind of trial and error. But anyway, I got through a rehab. And when I sold that house in 2015, that whole time I was still working as a full-time police officer, I think I netted like $41,000 in, equity that had gone up between my own, kind of elbow grease and the market rising. So that was kind of what turned the light on for me. Like, okay, there's something to this real estate. I made $41,000, which was like, over a half a year's salary at the time by accident. What if I actually, learned what I was doing and did this on purpose? So that kind of opened my eyes to it. And it was sort of timely at that point. I've been a cop almost 5 years, and I had worked at 3 different departments at that point. So I kind of bounced around part-time and then full-time at 2 departments. And I had seen some of the older officers retire. And the one theme I was seeing at the time was that a lot of these officers were, miserable people, just had been in the job 20, 30 years, 40 years, some of them, let's just put it this way. Very few of them were healthy, happy, and going to have a long, enjoyable life after the retirement age, right? That's probably the nicest way to put it. And I saw that, and it was kind of an example of what I didn't want my life to look like in 20 years. So that kind of, put a little bit of fire in me to figure out something other than law enforcement. And at the time, it was maybe just to maybe accelerate my retirement a little bit. I didn't necessarily think I would ever go in full-time into investing, but it definitely put a little bit of a fire in me. And that led me into long-term buy and hold multifamily, which is what I've been doing the last 5-6 years.
Awesome. I love it. That's great that you recognize that and were able to, just be like, hey, I do not want this for myself, so I'm going to figure something else out. And you did, and that's awesome. So next investment then after the first one, did you go into like duplex multifamily and
Yeah. My
Look back.
first intentional investment was a duplex in the city I worked for as a cop. So it's very small town. It's like zero point 0.8 square miles. There's like 5,000 residents, but I wanted something, especially for my first deal, I wanted something that I would be able to literally drive by every day. Obviously, the tenants would know I worked there, and it would hopefully give me a little bit of a buffer to pick out some, quality tenants that I'm not going to have issues with. And the house itself, before I bought it, was actually a problem house. So it was a house we were constantly making arrests at. I knew the inside was trash because I had been in it to make arrests, and had several calls there as a police officer. So when they listed that property, I think I kind of watched it drop in price for like 6 months at the time, which I know in this market doesn't ever happen. But at that point, the market was a little bit slower. And, I watched the drop in price and kind of realized, okay, this could actually be a good deal. So I think I picked it up for like 89,000 and probably put, maybe 30 or 40 into it. Again, I did a lot of the work myself on that first deal. And then I refied it about a year later for, I think it appraised for like 175 or something. So I was able to pull a lot of my cash out, and that led me into my second deal. Basically, again, at the time, I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I was starting to, listen to podcasts, read books. And so I kind of did the BRRR deal, or the BRRR method, before I really understood what it was.
Awesome. I love it. And obviously a huge strategy. I did an episode a little while back with Matt Faircloth, and we talked about, if we could go back, what we would change. And one thing I would do is definitely do the BRRR on 2 to 4 units, and just kind of rinse and repeat, which is exactly what you're doing. So kind of talk about that strategy, what it's like now with, this kind of shake in the economic landscape, as well as, we've enjoyed a nice bull run.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you mentioned, I'm a real estate agent here in Ohio. I'm based in Cincinnati, and I work with a ton of out-of-state clients and local clients, and a lot of them love the idea of doing the BRRRR deal. So this is a kind of a conversation I have often. And, I jokingly, kind of jokingly say, as much as I'm the BRRRR guy, and that's what I've done, I advocate against it all the time because it is extremely challenging, especially in the market we're in now, right? It's very hard to find deals, which is, kind of step one in a BRRRR deal, to actually find a distressed property that you can get under market value, which is very difficult. And then, the way labor shortages, supply chain shortages, the way, when you're dealing with large renovations and government inspections and all the different, moving parts that go into a BRRRR deal. My average BRRRR deal right now is taking about 12 months, right? I mean, so it's like, and that used to be 6 months pre-pandemic. So there's a lot of factors that go into that, but you have 12 months of holding costs. You're dealing with a ton of stress and headaches, and at the end of the day, by the numbers, they're better deals, of course, and that's why we do them. But I would say that they are not for most investors, and I think it's particularly difficult to pull off if you are going to be investing out of state, unless you have a really good, team under you're working with in that market that you really trust, because there's a ton of risk and a ton of money and a ton of issues that can arise doing BRRRR deals.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. What you mentioned you deal with a lot of out of state. What are some things that you do tell them, or what are you seeing them and kind of advising them on in terms of investing out of state?
Yeah, so part of my initial conversation with most of my new clients is that you really need to determine as an investor, like, what do you want? Like, what are you looking to do? And what I mean by that is, like, I'm at a point now in my investing journey where I'm financially free, and I don't need to have a 30, 40, 50, 60% ROI on every deal I do. Like, to do that, to do a BRRRR deal like that, or even, if you hit a home run and you pull all your cash out and you get an infinite return, let's say, to do that is a ton of time, energy, effort, and risk. So you need to determine, like, is that really what you want? Are you willing to put in all the time, effort, and energy and risk to get that type of return? Or are you a high income, high net worth type of person who's just trying to diversify and maybe get into a more, way less complicated, way less time involved, way less risk of a deal where you might only get a 10, 15, 20% return, right? And I think people, when they look at the reality of doing these really complicated deals for, like, low and no money down type of stuff, that's not necessarily a good fit for every type of investor. So that's usually kind of the first conversation we have is, like, if you're making 500K a year, you probably don't need to try to pull out your 30 or 40K on the back end of a BRRR, like on a small multifamily. It probably doesn't make sense for that much time, effort, and risk, at least in my opinion.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that's certainly one thing you hear from, kind of established investors is, determining what it is you want from real estate investing, because then that will determine what strategy to use, right? Because cash flow may not be something that everybody needs. Like you mentioned, if you're making, a large salary, you may not need cash flow. Maybe you just want appreciation. So kind of determining, your ultimate goal and why you want it as well is certainly important.
Exactly.
Awesome. So you mentioned that you self-manage everything. Is that going to be your plan going forward? You mentioned you're also looking to scale into some larger, assets. Are you eventually, talking about potentially bringing on third-party management?
Yeah. So my company is called Realty One Stop, and I'm licensed under a different brokerage, but that's kind of my brand that we do, buying and selling for our clients. We do renovations for our clients. And then that's my company that I hold all of my actual, cell phone portfolio as a kind of an arm of that company. But anyway, all that's to say that the only thing we don't do that may be part of future plans is actual third-party management for like clients. Now, the reason why I self-manage is because I've been able to build out systems the last 5-6 years that make it really minimal time. And as you mentioned, I think in the bio, I do have an assistant who handles a lot of that, tenant contact, lease ups, all that kind of stuff I don't want to do. So for me, it just makes sense to handle that myself. And it's a lot cheaper than, paying a third-party manager. But if we were to scale out to, hundreds or thousands of units, which, could happen in the future, then what we would likely do in that case is actually just build out our own in-house management company that would then allow us to service like we do on the other, areas for our clients as well.
Awesome. Love that. We mentioned in the intro, you've got the construction, I assume, and could be a bold assumption, that kind of extended from you learning along the way. So kind of talk about that, what made you decide to kind of start that part, and do you have a partner for that, or do you run that yourself as well?
Yeah, no, I own both of those companies. So basically everything I do is because I ran into an issue where it became a necessity, at least in my view it was. So I started working with agents back in 2015 when I was looking for my first investment property. And I quickly realized that most real estate agents don't know anything about investment property. So after a couple failed attempts, I kind of realized the name of this game is speed and access, right? And if I don't have my own license, I don't have either one of those things. And I'm basically at the mercy of this other agent, to hopefully represent my interest as well as I would. And I also realized that most agents, like I said, don't know anything about investment property. So I kind of realized the barrier entry to be an agent is pretty low, and most agents are really terrible. No offense to any of the agents out there, but if you think I'm talking about you, I probably am. But anyway, so I looked at it like, if I'm going to be serious about this, I'm going to build out a business and I'm going to scale a portfolio, I need to have my own access. And then I realized that there's obviously a need in the market, because if I'm having trouble finding an agent who can do what I want to do, then maybe I can be that resource for other people. Anyway, back to your question, the same thing happened with the construction business. So like I mentioned, that first duplex, I started doing a lot of the work myself. I didn't have a ton of cash. And the few things I had subbed out went horribly wrong. I had people who took my money and never showed up. I had people who were working alongside me on site doing other things I hired them for, who stole my tools, my own tools while I was there working with them. I had, people who said they did stuff, like I had a guy who said he fixed some electrical issues. Well, he didn't, I paid him and he didn't actually do it. And I didn't find out till after. So I made every mistake you possibly could when it came to hiring contractors. And I knew enough about construction, as I mentioned, having, a little bit of a family experience. And then also, having kind of done some DIY projects myself, I knew enough to at least know what I was talking about. But what I realized quickly was that if I want to scale this, if I'm going to buy multiple properties every year, I can't rely on, subcontractors to fill that void. So I started just slowly hiring, kind of one handyman, and then he went full time when I had the scale. And as that built up, it kind of became its own business. Again, not necessarily intentional. It just kind of organically grew that way. And then I formalized it and started branding and marketing, and got insured, and did all the formal things you need to do here in Ohio. And obviously, all my business are kind of ancillary to each other, right? I have clients who need construction. I have construction clients who need sales. I have tenants who want to buy houses. So they all kind of, work together. And that's how I came up with the Realty One Stop company. But yeah, it came out of necessity, I guess, is to the answer.
Awesome. I love that. Isn't there a saying about that? Some things are born out of, like, basically it alludes to the fact that like all the best inventions or businesses have been born out of necessity. I for sure butchered that, but I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, I'm in Cincinnati, and in my market at the time, there was a huge void when it came to investor agents and investor friendly, general contracting companies. I mean, now the market shifted, Cincinnati became a really hot kind of real estate market. So I've seen a ton of agents shift into the investment business and learn the business. So there are a lot more qualified agents now than there were 5-6 years ago. But at the time, there was like maybe 2 that I knew of that, and they were so busy because they were the only ones. It's like, a guy like me looking to buy a duplex every year, they weren't going to even waste their time on, right? So it's like, there's definitely a need in the market.
Awesome. I love that. So is it you mentioned the construction full service, so you'll do, rip it down to the studs if you have to, and
yep. And those are the deals I look for. Yeah. So obviously we do our own construction in-house for my portfolio. And then, but yeah, we've done basically every construction you can possibly imagine outside of new construction, ground up. So new development, but everything, we've done rehabs that were probably easier to do new construction. In hindsight, it would have been cheaper and easier to just tear it down and start over. But yeah, we've done, foundations, framing, additions, obviously all mechanicals, structural, whatever you can imagine, we've done it.
Awesome. Love that. So kind of talk about what are some of the changes you've seen in Cincinnati? Like I kind of mentioned offline, starting to pick up, a lot of people talking about investing there. So, what are some of the big changes you're starting to see?
Yeah, Cincinnati market, especially in the investment side, has been insane. It's extremely competitive, like most markets and metros in the country. I mean, it's not uncommon to have 30, 40, 50 offers on a listed property, even in the investment space. The larger deals have a ton of institutional attention, so syndicators, hedge funds. Those are the type of groups going after the larger multifamily properties and commercial properties. The areas that I focus on, which is like that kind of like 2 to 30 unit range, you're even seeing some of that institutional money, compete in those spaces because there's just such low inventory. But since I've been in the market, I would say cap rates have went from like a high of 12, back when the market was a lot cheaper. And you're seeing deals now trade at like five caps. So, I mean, it's not all of them, of course, but if you're in a class A or B type of property in a really good area, the cap rates have compressed here tremendously over the last 3-4 years.
Wow. That's crazy. So, any plans, obviously starting to scaling quickly, in some aspects. So any plans of, going outside of the Cincinnati market?
Yeah, it's a possibility. I think I would have to either be unable to find deals in my criteria that I'm looking for here. If that shifts and it no longer makes sense, then that would be a possibility. Or if I were to, target something specific that I can't do in my market, like, beach houses or, Smoky Mountains or, something like that, where there's a niche that I just couldn't fill here. But yeah, at this point, I don't see that happening in the near future.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, sounds like still, especially in that 2 to 30 range, probably still a solid amount of inventory. So any plans to get into the new construction side of things? Obviously, we're at a very huge supply shortage. and so there's definitely some opportunity there. So is that something you see an
Yeah,
opportunity for?
it's really difficult. So I mean, I've looked at it, I've kind of done the math on it, and at least at this point in our market, it is still cheaper to rehab most existing properties. The areas you're seeing the new development is typically they're tearing down older homes and building a bigger single family home on a small lot where you have basically they're getting rid of all the yard space, because the demand obviously for new construction is for larger homes. So you're seeing a lot of that, 100-year-old house that gets torn down or 75-year-old house that gets torn down. But as far as like multifamily, on the investor side, it is very, very difficult to make new construction work. There's so much red tape. I mean, even with Ohio being an investor-friendly type of state, there's just so many, hoops you have to jump through to get new construction built. You have to get an area to allow zoning for it, which is very difficult. So just on the numbers side, it's almost impossible to get new construction to work, at least in the multifamily space.
Yeah, really, really great point there for sure. What are some things that are, at least for you, you mentioned out of necessity, you kind of like some of your, verticals were born, but what are some things that are really critical to you in terms of, making a business decision, whether that be a new acquisition or construction or something along those lines?
Yeah, like I said, I think for me going forward personally as an investor, I'm looking at, um, what is my best return with the limited amount of time. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I'm looking at. That's the axis on that. So obviously I want to get a good return, but even when picking an active investment, doing a, like, let's say a multifamily or something, what is going to be my minimal headaches, my minimal time, my minimal risk in doing so? And that's kind of what I'm basing my decisions on. We just had a baby a month ago, so obviously the
Congrats.
family's growing. Thank you. And things are becoming more of a priority than my personal portfolio. And again, I did hit my financial freedom numbers last year, and so that does take a little bit of I certainly am not as motivated as I might have been a year ago to find a deal. So I'm still buying, I'm still investing, but I'm definitely going to be a little bit more picky in my choices. And again, like I mentioned earlier, I'm willing to take a lower return on a deal that's going to be less headaches and less, of my personal time investment.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's awesome. Congrats on obviously the baby as well as that financial number.
Thank you.
How did you come up with that number where you would feel?
Yeah. So back to kind of the beginning of the story, like 2015, when I started trying to learn about investing, I started kind of doing the research on the financial independence, education as well, and really learning that as much as I did with the investing side. Obviously, they kind of go hand in hand, but I think at the time my take home after all my taxes and everything was like 4,000 a month, or that was like a good month, if I had like some overtime or whatever at the job. And I kind of said, okay, if I can keep my bills at or below this point that I'm at in 2015 and get to this much money in passive income, then I could retire, and that was kind of the beginning of that journey. And, as of last year, I had surpassed that as far as net cash flow. And, I've been able to keep my living expenses relatively low, so I haven't, since 2015, I haven't gone way up in my living expenses, which is obviously important if you're trying to become financially free. So, yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not, I'm not where I want to be. I definitely have higher aspirations and goals, and, I didn't retire just so I could simply, pay my bills and wait to die. But I'm definitely at a point where I don't have to chase a deal.
Awesome. I love that. So any change in strategy in terms of, maybe not so much on cash flow and maybe a little more on appreciation or,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I would say that in general, I'd probably be willing to take a little bit more of a risk on, for the upside of appreciation. But I think for me, I'm still going to invest for cash flow. And, Cincinnati's a cash flow market. So, there's only a few pockets here that I would consider like an appreciation play where you're going to have little to no cash flow as far as what people are investing in. But it's, you know, again, I look at it as what's my return, what's my cash flow, and how much time I'm going to have to put into it. So for me, that means I'm looking at hopefully bigger deals, but also deals that are more turnkey. Maybe I just have cosmetic updates, or I'm not going to be stripping down to the foundation, down to the frame, and having to, rebuild the entire structure like I have been doing on the last several deals. So that's kind of what I'm transitioning to.
Awesome. Makes perfect sense. Kind of more those core investments, not as much deferred maintenance. Just kind of the steady, tried and true. So what are rent gross like in Cincinnati over the last couple of years?
Oh yeah, the growths have been insane. I mean, I think the last time I looked at a stat, it was like close to 20% year over year. So
Holy cow.
yeah, it's been insane, and the demand. It's honestly a sad situation for tenants. I when we put a property up for lease, I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds of messages. Of course, we can only pick one qualified applicant. So, and everybody's got their issues, and I feel, home buyers and tenants are in a very similar situation, right? I mean, if you're in a desperate situation where you have to move right now, it's not a good position to be in, whether you're a buyer or a tenant, because there's not enough housing, there's not enough inventory. I've even had tenants, kind of do bidding wars for market rents because, they're just trying to find a place to live. And, we do rehab our units. We try to make them really nice. So we do have a lot of demand for our product, but still, it's very competitive, like a lot of other markets in the country right now.
Absolutely. Wow, that's crazy. I would have never expected that high of growth. So what kind of infrastructure is the city putting in place to kind of, handle all of this?
None. I mean, it's very, very little, right? I mean, the Metro City of Cincinnati is unfortunately, not been historically developed well. So we don't do a lot of actual investment in the city limits itself. We have a couple properties, but I kind of focus in the county and the suburbs, away from that, jurisdiction, so to speak. But there are some community developments going on, but let's put it this way: they're in no way, shape, or form keeping up with demand for affordable housing. So they are woefully behind, like most other metro areas, which is creating this massive shortage of housing, and is just continuing to rise the cost of rent, because it's really like the highest bidder right now. And Ohio is a very landlord friendly state. Now the city has a little bit of more restrictions on landlords than the state will at the state level, but still, if you compare Cincinnati as a Midwest city to any of the coastal cities or anything like that, the laws are still heavily landlord friendly. So unfortunately, it's a difficult market for tenants.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, that affordable thing, that's nationwide, like you said. Unfortunately, that's just kind of the nature of it. And hopefully, these cities and even maybe up to the federal level, there'll be something in place. But for the most part, they're getting in their own way. So it's definitely making it tough. But as we kind of close out here, I've got 5 questions that I ask all of my guests. It's the final 5. What's the best advice you've gotten from a mentor?
That's tough. I would say that, and I've worked with a lot of really experienced investors, so I don't know specifically who would have said this, but I know they all have passed a lot of wisdom on over the years. But kind of the theme I picked up from working with a lot of mentors is that this business and investing in real estate or any sort of asset is the get rich slow type of path. And the people I've seen who try to get rich quick usually doesn't work out well. So they either burn out or they do something unethical, or something happens that derails them from that journey. So I've always tried to keep that in the back of my mind, that you just want to keep kind of making these base hits, doubles, whatever you want to call it, but it's a get rich slow sort of journey, and that's the path I'm on.
Awesome. I love it. So true. And it's tried and true method, as long as you're willing to play that long game. What is it about your career that makes you feel like you're fulfilling your why?
Yeah, so I mean, back to why I got into real estate in the first place. I was looking for a way to not be forced into my law enforcement career for another 20 or 30 years, and the main why for that is to have a family. I have 2 children, and I wanted to be available for them. I didn't want to miss out on all the things that they're doing in life. So, to be able to quote unquote retire in 6 years, was a dream of mine, and it happened faster than I imagined. But, now I can pick and choose who and how I work. And that affords me the ability to, I coach my daughter's soccer team. I'm there for all the family moments, whenever we want to, take a trip or whatever we need to do, I'm available to do that. And I would not have been able to do that, in my W-2 job, and certainly not in the type of W-2 job I had that was very, schedule oriented. And it was, a commitment that you really can't get out of. So.
Awesome. I love that. Do you do any coaching with fellow officers and kind of help show them your strategy? And
yeah, I've tried. I've tried to teach a lot of the guys that I worked with at my department, neighboring departments, and honestly, it was not. There was not as much interest as you might have thought. I think a lot of people who have that mindset of working in a W-2 job, whether it's law enforcement or anything else, sometimes it's hard for them to understand that to change your life path, you have to take a little bit of risk, and some people just aren't in that mindset of being willing to take those risks. So it's not as easy as you might think.
No, I get that for sure. I mean, I'm seeing the same thing. People like that sort of that stability, and that, I don't even want to call it a guarantee because no one's job is guaranteed, but yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Favorite non-real estate or investment related book?
Non-real estate, non-investment related. And I do not read a lot of fiction. I read the first Game of Thrones book. That was really good. That took forever. I really liked the show up until the last season. So I would like to get the time to read the other 4 or 5 books. But yeah, that's a
What
really
do you read?
good
A lot
series.
of like self-help? You got a good self-help book that you love? Or what do you read?
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, everything I read is fiction or nonfiction. So I read business books, I read investment books. And I actually was never really a big reader until I got into, investment. So, that kind of got me into reading and listening to audiobooks and things like that. But yeah, I've spent very, very little time on fiction.
Did you know much about running a business before you got into this?
Not at all. I knew nothing about it. And sometimes I feel like I still don't know anything about it, but it's, I've read a lot of books. I read, Traction. I read From Good to Great, some of the E-Myth. Those are some of the business books that really kind of help at least give me a structural, kind of a formal structure in my mind to build my own processes around. But yeah, it's definitely a work in progress. I definitely learn every day, every month, every year, and improve as I go. So
I love that. Yeah. The only reason I want to highlight that is because I know a lot of my listeners may be on the fence or, don't think that they're worthy. Imposter syndrome. I mean, I struggle with imposter syndrome constantly. And same thing, right? I'm listening to books, I'm interviewing experts. Like, I can't tell you how many things I've implemented that I've learned from doing a podcast. You know what I mean? Because
sure.
And the thing people need to understand is those people didn't really know much either, like
Absolutely.
You just got to start, you got to do it, take action.
Yeah, I think you definitely learn more by doing than by trying to educate yourself. And education is really important. I'm not saying don't do that, but I definitely learned more by failing and just, keep progressing, one foot in front of the other. I've learned more that way for sure.
Absolutely. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Oh man, superpower. I would probably want to be, live forever, because I think in forever you could get a lot done. I think it would probably make life a little less meaningful, but I think I could get a lot done if I live forever. So that's probably what I'd pick. Love
that. So true. Awesome. And last one, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you and learn more?
Yeah, so they can email me is probably the easiest way to get me. It's jcornwell@realtyonestop.com, and check my email all the time. So if anybody's interested in, just having a conversation or learning more, or any interest in Cincinnati real estate, feel free to hit me up, and happy to jump on a call with you.
Cool. Joe, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yep. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. Listen, I know it's cliche and you hear it all the time, but Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you know when the next video is coming out. Even though this is technically a daily podcast, you know it's coming out the next day. We have a ton of content coming your way. So please like and subscribe. It helps a ton. Leave comments. We'd love to know what you guys think. And we will see you on the next one. Thanks so much.